operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to take a look at the Gators' upcoming matchup against the Texas A&M Aggies in the Swamp at 3:30 this Saturday, September 14th. And it's a very interesting matchup as the Gators not only face a first-year coach at Texas A&M and Mike Elko, who, of course, was a defensive coordinator there under Jimbo Fisher, but on Elko's staff is the Gators' former linebacker coach, Jay Bateman, and also Coach Chaos, our former defensive line coach. And so it's two guys that are familiar with this program and Billy Napier's setup for offense and playing against that in practice every day. So definitely an interesting storyline there from the top. Since the Aggies have joined the SEC in 2012, this will be the fifth meeting between the two schools. Of course, if you got a chance to see, if not, definitely check out the video where I talked to Agnox or Agjack from the Agnox podcast about, and we brought up this 2012 game. It was the SEC opener for A&M that season, and then, of course, this year the SEC opener is here for both Florida and Texas A&M. So that was in 2012. Of course, we played them in 2017 when we had those ugly swamp green uniforms. And then 2020, they ended up on the schedule. Of course, we went to see them in 2022. We, went back to see them only 2 years later, which was part of the regular rotation for the schools. And I enjoyed my trip out there in 2022. And then, of course, when they set the schedule for the first 2 years after further expansion with Texas and Oklahoma joining, we ended up paired up with A&M for a home and home for that as well. I'm not as concerned as some people are. Again, I recognize that A&M actually probably has lower amounts or a less amount of winning seasons, I guess is a better way of putting it, as far as the SEC record, than Missouri does in that time frame. And there's nobody complaining about taking on Missouri. However, plenty of people act like A&M is Alabama or Georgia or LSU or something. I don't get that. I do think they're a fun school. I do think they have done some great things. Obviously, Johnny Manziel winning the Heisman that year back in 2012, but it is a very talented team that they bring in. Jimbo Fisher, I mean, we're talking about talent. 2022, I believe it was the highest recruiting class of all time, ratings wise, and not just for A&M, like according to some sites, highest that have been done. Now, granted, some of those players are still there, but some of the crown jewels, and this is what we talked about in this season preview, such as Walter Nolan, a defensive lineman. He's now at Ole Miss. And Evan Stewart, who has transferred out. I believe he's at Oregon. I could be wrong on that. So let me know in the chat if you have that on. I didn't look it up because the point was Evan Stewart, 5-star, one of the jewels of the class, is no longer there. So I've seen some people pointing to that 2022 class. Look, here's why we should be afraid. I'm like, maybe not as much as you think. Now, that's not to say not to respect, and definitely not saying they're not talented, but to lean on, hey, look like they still have everyone, is not quite the interesting thing. Of course, I talked about Jay Bateman, Coach Chaos being on there. It'll be interesting, and we'll talk about the offense things they need to do, but it will be interesting to see their impact. Obviously, had a pretty decent game against Notre Dame a few weeks ago, held Notre Dame to 13 points until less than 2 minutes left in the game. Notre Dame, of course, scores with 1:54, I believe, left, scores a touchdown, goes up 20-13. A&M goes 3 and out, 4 and out, and then Notre Dame ends up kicking a field goal to go up 23-13. But definitely a stingy job on that. Granted, Notre Dame did go out and lose to Northern Illinois last week, so how well that game really was, I don't know, but it's definitely worth saying that every team, including the Gators, gets better every week. With that said, before we get into the offense, I do want to shout out my friends at Alvarez Lawn Company. Alvarez Lawn Company, if you are in the Central Florida area, they are willing to do any lawn project that you have. Give them a call or text for a free quote at 407-490-2617. You can also shoot them an email at alvarezlawncompany@gmail.com. Once again, if you're like, hey, I don't want to mow my yard, or I've got this lawn project I've put off, and you're in the Central Florida area, give my friends at Alvarez Lawn Company a call. Once again, that number for a free quote is 407-490-2617. And you can email them at alvarezlawncompany@gmail.com. That is Alvarez Lawn Company, building plans that work for you. Now, moving on to our offense, of course, every week I give keys to the game. And the first key that I have for our offense against a defense that really we're not quite sure what they are yet. Obviously, it's a defense that knows our tendencies with coaches that have practiced, as I said, against our offense plenty of times, have been on the headsets during games and knows what Billy's tendencies are, knows what he likes to do with the ball. And so that's a little bit of an advantage that they have, that if this were some other defense, they may not. They may just be looking and saying, okay, here's the same few plays on tape, but now you've got guys who have been in the meeting rooms, know the thought process, and may even know hand signals. Who knows? But point is, it's a little bit different than if you're just coming up against a team that doesn't have anyone with the insider knowledge. So with that said, establish a run is my first key to this game for the Gators. And that's because Texas A&M has not been good against the run. They gave up 198 yards on the ground to Notre Dame. And last week against McNeese State, they gave up 180 yards on the ground against McNeese State. Now, some of that is, garbage time players racking up extra yards. And some of that is, well, their run defense has been suspect, but we've got to also run between the tackles. I mean, we saw against Miami when they start just cheating up, playing on the outsides, trying to force everything inside, it caused problems. We've also had problems running out the middle. Again, great example of that is the 4th and 1 with Treon Webb and the Wildcat, the very first 4th down of the game against Samford, and not being able to move them. And if we can start running in between the tackles where, Agnox, again, on YouTube, you can find talking with him. He's like, that's where we've had problems. So we need to exploit that. And I know that's where Billy likes to run the ball. So for sure, that should be the key. Main key is establishing that run. If you establish that run, everything else will come together as they do everything they can to shut down the run. However, if they're shutting down the run and forcing us to pass, well, then there's going to be an issue. And before anyone thinks, hey, Daniel, you're ignoring the quarterback issue. No, I'm going to address that definitely at the end. I do think that regardless of who the quarterback is, that we need to establish the run first, because we don't want teams selling out with 7-8 man boxes. And if you do that, we're not going to get the run game going, and it's going to put more pressure on our quarterbacks as defenses, if we drop back to pass, feel they can pin their ears back without fear of being punished. But with that said, key number 2 is getting vertical. Now, for those that are not aware of the potential quarterback controversy, again, we'll address that a little bit further down. But this is where DJ Lagway and his accuracy on the deep ball really would help. And again, I've said before, getting vertical does not necessarily mean we're throwing it deep. Although Deep ball accuracy really helps with getting vertical, way vertical, but it could just be getting 15, 20 yards. I mean, last year, Graham Mertz, 77% of his completions were 9 yards or less in the air, and opposing defenses just don't respect that. And so they creep up, and that's how you see teams like Miami. Now, granted, Miami is a talented team, but you've made it easy on the defense because you're not forcing them to play, the y-axis of the field, x-axis left and right. Okay, they've got to play that full. But if you're keeping that y-axis small and they can play close to the line and you're not doing anything to push them back from the line, that's going to plug up running room. That's going to cause all sorts of problems. So definitely need to get vertical, whether it's quick slants, whether it's, a 15-yard corner route, whatever it may be, figure out things to do to get vertical. And it's going to open up running game lanes, and it's going to impact those crowded boxes. And then the third key I have is Trey Wilson. I've talked a lot before, and I'll continue to talk about you need to do what Russ Callaway said in that presser back in the preseason. Get him the ball early and often. We talked about how in Miami he touched the ball, twice on the opening drive, only touched it 3 times, all the other drives combined until DJ Lagway came in. And then he had 2 straight catches on a slant, and both of them went for over 10 yards. And last week, early in the game, first half, we got 14 points. Trey Wilson had 0 touches. Now, some of that is Jaden Ball fumbling in the end zone. Some of it is you weren't getting your most explosive player the ball. And any good offensive mind wants to get their best player the ball in space, especially, as much as they can. I mean, last week we had one of our short little pop passes, and it turns into an 85-yard touchdown play, not because it was thrown by DJ Lagway, because, again, I said this in the review, I'll say it now, I believe my mom could make that little 1-yard pop pass, but it was Trey Wilson recognizing where his hole is, hitting the Jets, and just outrunning everyone. Granted, a team speed against Texas A&M may be a little different, but the point is you're getting them a chance to explode. You can't win the lottery without a ticket. Get your guy who can make things happen the ball more often, and you have a better chance of seeing more big plays. If he's getting more big plays, maybe they put an extra defender on him, double team him to take away his big plays. Well, if they're doing that, there might be a running lane open where the guy who now they've had the second defender on him used to be. Or maybe it opens up room for other receivers. Either way, you've got to get Trey Wilson the ball early and often. Talked about in the Samford review, he got it. He got it. None in the first half, got tons in the second half. Second half offense explodes. And so that's really what I think we need to see from the offense is, regardless of who the quarterback is, whether it's DJ Lagway, whether it's Graham Mertz, you've got to establish the run. You've got to, take advantage of what has been, at least up until this point, a poor run defense by Texas A&M. You've got to get vertical in your passing game, and that means getting 10, 15, 20 yards, and if you can, even further on a few throws, but just simply getting the 10, 15 yards will open up a lot more of this offense. And for number 3 key, getting Trey Wilson the ball early and often. Well, before we transition to defense, I want to talk about my friends at GatorChatter.com. Gator Chatter is a Florida Gator message board owned by Gator fans and exclusively catering to Gator fans. Sorry about that. Lots of fun discussion, lots of games going on, such as Pick'em, Survivor, and I've got to say, Georgia Tech blowing it against Syracuse last week, getting me a knock on Survivor. Quite frustrating, but that is what it is. Anyways, Gator Chatter, definitely check it out. My friends over there, been together a long time, they are definitely worth going and joining the conversation. GatorChatter.com, your Florida Gators sports bar. And now let's move on to the defense and kind of the inverse of the offense for my first key, and that is to stop the run. Connor Wegman, the quarterback for Texas A&M, has had a somewhat rough start to the season. 12 of 13 against Notre Dame, and last week a lot better completion percentage. Only played the first half, but it was McNeese State, and Wegman showed, at least against Notre Dame, he can be shaky, when the game gets put on his shoulders. So if you stop that run game, you put the game on his shoulders, he might start either turning the ball over or get inaccurate. Again, 12 of 30 in that game against Notre Dame, and always good to stop the run. We talked about Miami stop the run. We didn't, and that opened everything else up for Miami. So if we can make that step this game, it'll go a long way to Florida having their first win over an SEC and FBS opponent since last October. The second key to the game I have is to have a great pass rush. We got 0 sacks and generally allowed Cam Ward to have lots of time in that first game of the season. Against Samford last week, 4 sacks. Now, some of that is you were playing Samford and not playing an offense that was Power 5 level. However, A&M's not been that great as far as keeping keeping pressure away from Wegman. They gave up only 1 sack, but plenty of pressure to Notre Dame, and of course, the pressure caused some issues with Wegman's accuracy. But again, if we can't get a pass rush, that's not going to be good, not just for this game, but moving on, because we do have some very pass-heavy teams coming up. And so I'd like to see us establish this at home, because next week on the road against Mississippi State, they're going to throw early and often. Then 3 weeks later, you got a bye week. You got UCF, who's mostly going to run the ball, though has shown some ability to pass this season. And then you go to Tennessee, who's going to pass a lot. So this is a game that if you're going to show you've got a good pass rush, do it. I mean, you've brought in guys that are experienced like Joey Slackman. You've got guys who it's their second, third year in the system, such as a Tyreek Sapp, such as a Justice Boone. Hopefully, if Boone causes some chaos, he's not getting a penalty like he did against Miami. And that's not to harp on the guy, but just to show there were times that we did get it, and then we did something boneheaded. So hopefully this defense keeps it together. And then my final key is that we're going to need multiple turnovers in this game. One, gives an offense a short field. Miami, our first score was off of that turnover. We got an early turnover against Samford. Granted, that ended up being turnover on downs. But turnovers give us better field position equals higher chance we score. And with us not knowing the quarterback situation and us knowing that Billy's play calling is kind of, so-so, anything we can do to help. And that's where, we've talked about in the past, pass rush, stopping the run, pass rush. Well, if you've got that pass rush, Wegman might turn the ball over because he's got all sorts of pressure on him. And he had 2 interceptions in that Notre Dame game. And there's no reason when you got guys like Jason Marshall back there that you can't pull off some interceptions. Heck, last week, it wasn't an interception by Marshall. It was a strip, so you never know what can happen. And then also, again, Wegman last week, not really much on the pressure, 2 TDs, but again, 2 TDs against McNeese State, and it wasn't like there was anything over the top crazy, kind of like the opposite of what we saw Well, and that's in one half, kind of the opposite of what we saw from DJ last week. Well, with that said, that's my three keys for the defense, and that's to stop the run, to have a pretty good pass rush, cause chaos, get pressure on Wegman, and then multiple turnovers will be a key if the Gators are going to pull off what would be an upset if you're looking at the line. Gators are the underdog, and that's at home. So pulling the upset at home, I think we're going to need those multiple turnovers. Of course, turnovers bring the crowd into it. Crowd wasn't really fully into it against Miami because of the way the game started, because there wasn't momentum. And so that's the part where I'd say, hey, multiple turnovers, help keep the fans into it, the fans stay in it. Maybe that helps the pass rush. Maybe that causes confusion for Wegman. And then we see what we need. But all that's predicated on stopping the run. And then finally, I do want to address the big thing going on in Gator Nation right now. And that, of course, is the DJ Lagway, Graham Mertz, who should be the starter conversation. Personally, I feel that DJ Lagway probably gives us a higher ceiling and not much lower of a floor because he's got better deep ball accuracy with an O-line that is still having problems at times. He brings mobility to get away from a pass rush. And yes, there's going to be freshman mistakes, but it also helps build for the future. Graham Mertz is probably not the guy we can think of just by the Miami game, but Graham Mertz also has some limits. He's not the most accurate, I should say, when you get 15 plus yards down the field, where DJ Lagway showed that he's a lot more accurate. Again, it's Sanford, but sometimes things like ball placement and whatnot are things that doesn't matter who your competition is. And I think last week we at least saw from DJ Lagway that he potentially gives Florida's offense a higher ceiling if he hits everything and brings dynamics to the game that Graham Mertz doesn't with his legs. And then also, again, that deep ball accuracy and intermediate accuracy, as he had some great intermediate passes, both over the middle and to the left side. And actually, intermediate and long to the left side is something that Graham Mertz doesn't throw a lot. So DJ actually, at least based on one game, can pass in like the different quadrants of the field that you didn't really see much if you look at Graham Mertz's chart from last year. With that said, Graham Mertz has been in the system 2 years. He's been around college football for, this is season 6. This is a guy who's seen it all, lived through it, and has been as much of a hardworking quarterback leader that we could ask for at the University of Florida. And I'm not a big you lose your spot due to injury. So for me, I do think Graham Mertz should at least start this game against the Aggies. Now, with that said, I'm not saying there is not a leash. I'm not saying there shouldn't be a somewhat small leash after what you've seen. And so we will see. I do think Mertz deserves that chance to show he can move the offense and do it as well as DJ Lagway did. Again, we can go back and talk about the Miami game, for example, outside of a handoff that goes for a long touchdown to Montrell Johnson. We don't really have a drive at all that game. Our field goal comes off of a turnover, offense basically not moving. DJ comes in. It's a mixture between backups and starters, probably not playing as aggressively, but DJ does move us and take us on touchdown drive. And he does that with vertical passing through those slants, like we talked about with Trey Wilson, and also shows his legs, picks up a 3rd and long by pulling down the ball, running, and getting that first down, which is something that is just not Mertz's forte. We've seen him pull down the ball and make some good things happen before, yes, but just that extra speed, extra size, that's things that DJ brings. But again, I think Mertz has to have the opportunity, or at least for me, Mertz should have the opportunity to go out there and, if nothing else, show whether he can move this offense or not. But if the offense is middling again, if all the completions are, 10 yards or less, or 80, 90% of the completions are really close beyond the line, that's not going to get it done. Like I said, one of the keys is get vertical. And if he can't get the offense vertical, bring in a guy who maybe can. And that's not a knock on him. Again, I think Graham Mertz has been everything that the Gators could want out of a quarterback, at least off the field. On the field, obviously, there are things we could ask more of. But again, he's been pretty solid. It's just a matter of what is the ceiling and potential. And you got a young guy who's learning, who, with his potential, brings the ceiling of that offense a lot higher. One last thing I would like to address is, and I saw a tweet about this, and it's kind of funny. But last week, I'm sitting in the stands with my niece who's in med school at UF, and my niece asked me, "Who do I think's gonna start, next week?" Meaning this game, Texas A&M. And I said, "I think it's gonna be Graham Mertz." And she goes, "Well, why?" And I said, "Well, if nothing else, Billy Napier is a very loyal guy to his players, and that's fine. What I am afraid of is it's causing the perfect storm." And I was there 2006 Kentucky game when the decision to pull Tim Tebow out of the game caused people to boo. And I didn't think it was cool then, don't think it's cool now. But there's definitely a situation where fans, if Graham Mertz starts, offense is not moving well, where fans end up booing. And I have seen conversation on X about it, where we're not booing Graham, we're booing the coaches. You can't tell who those boos are for when you're on the field. What I would say, if you've really got a problem, just start chanting, "We want Lagway" or something. And I'm not saying that's the best either, but at least then it doesn't seem like there's, as much negativity towards one player as much as there's positivity for one player. So again, not ideal either way, but we're kind of in a rock and a hard place. But please, even if you're frustrated with Billy, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be if we start this game and the offense isn't moving and it looks like it does against Miami, but I'm saying don't do anything that could be conceived as booing these players. I'm not cool with that. Again, if you want to start "We want Lagway," do it. Again, not ideal, but at least it's more positively for one player than is negatively potentially for another and potentially other players down there, even though we know it's directed at the coach, because I don't think anyone is purposely meaning for it, but don't give it a chance to be misinterpreted. And that's honestly what I've got to say about that. Is, in short, again, that rant, don't do anything like booing that can seem like it's directed at the college student. If anything, make a chant about Billy or chant positively for another student athlete. But with that said, what do I think how this game's going to work out? Well, I always say on here, I don't pick against the Gators. I think there's always a path to victory, no matter how slim it'll be. And I say that, having been to some recent Georgia games. But I would say that this game will probably turn out a lot more like that Notre Dame game, with Texas A&M, a low scoring, kind of grinded out affair, with Texas A&M having such a, mixed run defense and Florida really being predicated on the run. I think that's the matchup that, if our offensive line gets it right, will be the one that propels the Gators over the top. So I'm going to pick the Gators 24-17 over Texas A&M. We'll see how that works out. And really, I mean, it's an interesting time to be a Gator fan. I mean, we've seen some hope in Lagway. We've seen some, okay, it's the Billy experiment's over from some people after Miami, and we'll see what it is. But either way, it's definitely must-see entertainment to see what's going to happen next with Gator football. With that said, thank you all for listening, and as always, go Gators.